Hello and welcome to Smug and Play, the show dedicated to mid-late 90s Windows games, technology, and culture. For those of you who haven't tuned in before, the gimmick of the show is that we are playing through PC Gamer's lovely monthly gaming discs. These are full of demos of PC games. So you can see I have quite a few here, but we're not just playing through the good ones or the ones that I like this one. No, we decided that we would actually play through all of them, which I bought and store in this enormous box, much to the consternation of my co-host. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Alan. Nice to meet you.
And I'm Austin. So, for those of you who have listened to our podcast and are saying, why can't I see any of the things that they're talking about? What is this new video format? No, you're not blind. You're not Stevie Wonder. You shouldn't be singing Rainbow in the Sky. Ribbon in the Sky, rather. But rather, we're moving our podcast into video format for people who want to actually see the games that we're talking about, which is something that people have been requesting on Facebook since we started the show, and which we've been ignoring for months and months. But now that it's 2020, it's a time for a new beginning. And so here we are. You can enjoy our faces. I'm sure we're exactly as you imagined us. And we're here to talk about May of 1995, where we have finally arrived. And what's going on in this lovely month of May, Alan?
Well, there's a big show called the E3,
hey!
also known as the Electronic Entertainment Expo. It's the very first one. And the big event here was the release of the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation. Nintendo had actually kind of bowed out. They were supposed to release their Ultra 64 and Nintendo 64 that year. But the week before E3, they announced that it wasn't going to happen that year. And so...
Oopsies.
Well, oopsies. But everybody else was excited because they were releasing stuff. Even Atari was excited to be releasing the Jaguar CD. You know,
oh, yes.
They had a shot.
Well, it has some incredible exclusives, such as Highlander. And if you... If you were interested in that, you can go watch other YouTube clips that show Highlander for the Atari Jaguar CD. It was one of very few titles actually released for it. I think most of the others were ports. I think they had a port of Myst, and there was a few things that were released after its death, such as a CD-exclusive sequel to Iron Soldier, which was kind of an interesting mecha game for Atari Jaguar. But yeah, you said one of the funny things is that it seemed in the press, it sounded like people still thought that Atari had a chance in the sort of mid-90s console race.
Well, they had the most bits. I think that's what they thought.
Their advertisement was very bit-oriented. Yes, we have 64 of them under some circumstances on a single chip and not for general computational purposes. But anyway, I mean, so there were kind of two headlining keynotes, right, at E3 95. The first was by Sega America's CEO, Tom Kalinske. Obviously, this whole thing gets, beautifully dramatized in the book Console Wars, which I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in what was going on in consumer entertainment during this period. But Tom Kalinske basically comes up and is like, does the sizzle reel of Saturn games, some stuff, the Saturn had come out earlier in Japan. And then as he's coming off the stage, he's like, oh yeah, and by the way, Sega Saturn, right, you can go buy one right now. You can just, we're selling them, it costs $399 at select retailers. And this is an industry trade show, right? So there are retailers that are there saying, what? No one told us, nobody shipped us any Saturn consoles, so who are these select retailers? And everyone's gonna go to their store for this hot new release and not ours. And Sega basically pissed off their retail partners forever and never really recovered from this.
Yeah.
And then Sony had a keynote right after.
But let's just say, so Sega, you could see other problems sort of on the surface. Most notably, they had amazing first-party games. They had Virtua Fighter, Virtua Racing, and Daytona. Panzer Dragoon, I think, was pretty awesome. It's an on-rail shooter.
Yes. Wonderful original
third-party titles they had to show were just kind of like old school, like 2D stuff. And it became apparent as time went on and the console came out that nobody really knew how to program for this Sega Saturn.
It is the most developer-unfriendly architecture
yeah.
of this period, really. Possibly the Jaguar might be in there as well. I decided I want to do a whole video, side video, I don't want to talk about it here, about just how tortured the development process for the Sega Saturn was, and the absolutely ridiculous albatross of a architecture that ultimately shipped. But needless to say, they were not in a great position coming into the 32-bit console race here.
Yeah. So then the next keynote was Sony, and they took advantage of coming after Sega. We'll just keep on building to that. Anyway, they brought up this guy named Olaf Olafsson and introduced him. It was very slow, this keynote. They introduced him as like, he's written 3 books. Like that's relevant at all.
Right.
But then, he's like, there's a lot of branding talk, but he's like, hey, we got really good 3D. And they started showing all these, third-party, pretty good 3D titles, Ridge Racer, Tekken. There was a Star Wars game. There was like baseball. Like they obviously had a more well-rounded, set of publishers. And as things built, it took a few years for any of these consoles to get, a lot of market share. But they obviously took off and left Sega in the dust. And the way they sort of did it at this E3 was they brought on their CEO, Steve Race, for a one sentence, I guess.
One sentence talk.
One sentence talk. Came up, said $299, so he undercut Saturn by
Dropped the mic, walked off. So here you have a system that is, I think, much more focused, the result of a much clearer vision on behalf of Ken Kutaragi and his development staff, that ends up being much more flexible ultimately than Saturn's architecture, even though Saturn has all these additional bits and bobs that, you should be able to make any sort of game with it. Ultimately, the PlayStation it's a cleaner design, it's cheaper to produce, the licensing works out better, and for developers, there are really solid development tools in place already, and ultimately, the Sony PlayStation is a Silicon Graphics workstation that's been scaled way down to a little box that you can put in your living room. And so it uses industry standard things like triangles, beautiful triangles, instead of texture map quads that the Saturn uses. And so it's much more sort of heading toward the future and the standards of how people design 3D entertainment, both for the big screen and for interactive experiences. And I mean I think that's all that needs to be said right now. What's going to happen next month is we're going to see what impact this has on the PC gaming space, which is that our friend NVIDIA is finally going to fly out of stealth and announce a big partnership. And this is going to almost destroy the company, bring them within 3 months of destruction. And yet somehow NVIDIA will rise from the ashes and become the juggernaut of 3D GPUs that they are today, which is a wonderful story. And we'll get to tell that story because we're going month by month. And so it's only just a month away.
So stay tuned.
Ring for that
bell.
That's right. Get hype. So PC Magazine, I believe on May 16th of this month, had as their cover story, getting ready for Windows 95, which is a way of saying Microsoft has delayed Windows 95. It's not out yet, so you still have plenty of time to get ready for it. It's a big overview article, shows some of the UI elements that are new. Things, you have contextual menus, and you have the taskbar, and you have the start
file names.
You have long file name support. Finally, all these things, and then there's this tiny, eensy-weensy little inset in one of the articles that talks about Windows 95 and multimedia. Of course, as gamers, we're interested to find out, what does Windows 95 mean for me? Am I going to finally get away from having to create boot disks for all my games so I have the proper memory setup? Can I just double-click it and launch it in Windows and have it work just as quickly as it would in DOS, but without all that overhead and confusion? And the answer is, not really quite exactly.
Eventually. Windows 95 in 98 eventually solved all these problems, but it had a long adolescence.
Right.
So this is probably pre-adolescence right now.
So in this article about Windows 95 and multimedia, they comment on the fact that in Windows 3.1, there's very little fast action games for Windows 3.1 because in order to Windows 3.1's drawing API was called GDI, the graphics display interface, and it is very standardized. You know, every card can be accessed using GDI, but it's very slow. It is not suitable for fast action games, and so of course no developers really used it. There were some games, you know, strategy games, turn-based games for Windows 3.1, and obviously some multimedia sort of edutainment sort of stuff. But
I mean, Minesweeper was the best game for Windows 3.1.
If you were playing a high-spec game in 1995, it was going to be in DOS, like Descent, Dark Forces, right? That's what you're seeing, even, you know, Warcraft. Windows 95, they promised a new library called WinG. Now, WinG will allow you to bypass the whole GDI stack and have a sort of accelerated frame buffer access that could be even faster than your frame buffer access in DOS, depending on how it's supported by the graphics card and by its driver. So that could be good, at least for just software rendered games. Now looking at 3D, PC Magazine calls out that it doesn't look like OpenGL is going to ship in Windows 95 as it did.
John Carmack is crying somewhere.
John Carmack is about to get very pissed off, but he actually doesn't get pissed off until around 1996. And we get to talk about that next year. But so OpenGL shipped as part of the system in Windows NT 3.5, but we're not going to. Looks like we're not getting that. Instead, there's this other company, and I want to get the name correct, but Microsoft has just bought a company called RenderMorphics. And RenderMorphics has its own API for 3D called, I don't know what it's called, Reality Lab. And Reality Lab is what ultimately becomes the first Direct 3D, but it is nothing like the Direct 3D that you know from the Windows 98 era or Direct 3D today. It's not like that at all. And not only is it not like that at all, but it doesn't ship until 1996, so it doesn't even arrive in Windows 95. So it's looking like Windows 95 is not going to mean a whole lot for gamers, which is a disappointment.
They're lost at sea for a little while.
We'll see some hints of gaming when we go into the Windows 95 launch and Bill Gates's scary flasher coat, and that'll be really fun to talk about. But do we want to say anything else about this lovely month of May, or shall we move on to the gimmick of this show?
Yeah.
Which is this month's demos on the PC Gamer Disc.
Yeah, I want to play BioForge.
You want to play BioForge? It's made by Origin. They made Wing Commander. I'm sure it's going to be awesome. Should we play it? Okay.
Yay!
Let's switch